All right, inverse trig functions is the very last thing that my geometry students are doing. The regular trig functions that they have been using so far are cosine of an angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Sine of an angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. And tangent of an angle equals opposite over adjacent. And I wrote notes for them that they need to be remembering that we got ka, so, and toa. I wish I wrote those in order, but I did not. But right, toa, tangent, opposite over adjacent. So, sine, opposite over hypotenuse. Ka, cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. These, the other note I wrote in, these are used to solve for a missing. These functions are used to solve for a missing side. Okay, that's what the assignment I gave, the few assignments I gave. You use these when you know the angle, you know one of the sides, and you're going to solve for the second side, either the leg or the hypotenuse, but you're solving for a side when you're using these. Now, inverse trig functions, we're going to have cosine inverse of the sides, and then sine inverse of the sides, and then tangent inverse of the sides. So, see how these ones here are solving for side, and this one over here, switch colors, is solving for the angle, all right? So inverse trig are used to solve for an angle. All right, and it's the same stuff. This still applies, right? So when I switch from cosine to cosine inverse, I'm still using ka. I'm still using a over h. It's really important. I'm still using a over h. This is still ka. This is still so, and this is still toa. Crap. This is still toa. All right. Now I'm gonna walk through how to solve some problems, and my students, it's the end of the year. We're just doing some basic problems. You do need a calculator. My students, I've been telling them to use Desmos, free graphing calculator online. App for your smartphone, it's free once you download it. You don't need to use data for it anymore. All right, so let's solve some stuff. So we are not doing this because that's what we've been doing. I have videos for how to solve for missing side. We are not using those. So I'm going to erase this half. Don't need this either because we know we're going to be solving for an angle. So let's say I have sine of angle A equals 0.5234. There's only one thing I could solve for in this problem, and usually the directions are going to say what's the measure of angle A? Solve for the measure of angle A. So I need to solve for angle A. All right, that's what I'm trying to solve for. What we do, what inverse, right? Invert, inverse, invert, to undo, to do the opposite of. All right, it's the same thing when you do inverse operations, like what cancels out? Addition. Subtraction, what cancels out? Multiplication. Division. All right, it's the same thing here. If I want to cancel out a sign, so I do the inverse to both sides, because remember, what you do to one side, you do to the other side. That way it doesn't change anything, right? If you do it to one side, you have to do it to the other side. So I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to give myself some space because I am going to do the inverse trig function to both sides. So I'm going to put 0.5234 here. I am going to take, am I going to take the cosine inverse, the sine inverse, the tangent inverse? Which one do you think cancels out sine? Sine inverse, all right? So I take sine inverse, 1. And what I do to one side, I do to the other side. This right here cancels out. I am doing the inverse of this trig function. So these two things cancel each other out, which is the whole point, because now I have A by itself. So now I have angle A by itself. This doesn't cancel out because I don't have sine over here. So I just have sine inverse of 0.523. Ooh, I forgot something in there. That's ugly. That's not erasing. 5, 2, 3, 4. Well, I've solved for A, but I don't like this. But this I can type in to your calculator, and this is why you have to have a calculator. All right, this is why a calculator is required. Grab the right color. You are going to type this exact thing in your calculator. Let me grab one, going right here. Remember, you have to make sure that it is, the mode is in degrees, not radians, has to be in degrees. If you're doing degree problems, which my students are in geometry, you should be dealing with degrees. So I am going to do sine inverse, which is there on my calculator, 0.5234. And I'm gonna round to 2 decimals because that's what I have my students doing. So 31.56. So A equals 31.5. Oh, bad. .56 degrees. That's the answer. All right. So the important step is this. You have to do the inverse. So if this was cosine, I would do cosine inverse. If this was tangent, I would do tangent inverse to cancel it out. And then I would have, all right, it's the same process. You just switch based on which one you're starting with, and you invert it. All right, got to use a calculator. This is the easier stuff. Now, this one you don't have a choice. The problem tells you what trig function you have to use. I have to use sine inverse to cancel out sine. I have to use cosine inverse to cancel out cosine. I have to use tangent inverse to cancel out tangent. But when you have a triangle and you have to pick, some students aren't always so good at picking which trig function to use. That's why it's really important to have SOHCAHTOA written somewhere. All right, so what I mean by that is, let's say we got a triangle. Got a right triangle, very specific, right? All this is right triangles. Let's say I want to solve for this angle, and I know that this is 10 and this is 4. which trig function do I use? It's the same as the last couple videos I've made, is you look at it as how you've been looking at it. So, ka, toa, what do I have? So I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna label this. I've told my students, please have a piece of scratch paper out. Please draw this so that you can label it. All right, I always label. So this would be hypotenuse. This would be the adjacent. And then right, that would be opposite. So I have O and A, O and A, O and A, O and A. So we're using TOA. This is a tangent problem. So I'm gonna set it up. I have tangent. No, I don't want to write out the word. Tangent. I'm not going to put a question mark in there. I'm going to put this symbol, because that's what we replace angle with. If we don't know if it's angle A, B, C, if we don't have a letter, then you put this in there. Equals opposite, opposite over adjacent, so 4/10. Okay, now I'm immediately where I was in the example before. I need to cancel out tangent. Which of these cancels out tangent? That one. All right. So, might run out of board space on this one. Tangent theta equals, I'm gonna give myself some space. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing I did in that last problem, but instead of doing sine, I'm doing tangent. So I'm gonna do the tangent inverse of this side. I'm gonna do the tangent inverse of that side. Cancels out, and I get theta. It's Greek, theta, that's what that's called, theta. All right, and I will get that equals tangent inverse of 4/10. Now all you do is you type this into the calculator and round to 2 decimals to my students, because I'm telling you to round 2 decimals, and you answer degrees. That's your answer. That's the answer you type in on Google form. All right. You have to decide which trig function you're going to use. You set the trig function up, just like the other last 2 or 3 assignments. But then you have to cancel out with an inverse function to solve for the angle. All right, these are the 3 steps. It's not even 3 steps, that's just writing it down. I mean, I guess it is a step. Pick the trig function, cancel out the trig function, and then type it into your calculator. And you got your answer. All right, figure out the trig function, cancel out the trig function, type it in on your calculator. All right. That's about it. I think that sums it up. I'm trying to keep this shorter. My students do get notes. But it's the same thing. You just apply it to the 3 different trig functions. All right. Hope that helped anybody who watched this video. Thank you for watching.